The supervisors to order, please. Please rise, and we will start with a pledge of allegiance. Please remain standing, because followed by that will be a moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will have the reading of the notice, please.
A special meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors will be held at the Marathon County Courthouse, Assembly Room, 500 Forest Street, in the city of Wausau at 7 p.m. on Thursday, August 8th, 2019. The agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. We'd like to request everyone please put their cell phones and any other electronic devices on silent or vibrate, please, as to not interrupt the meeting. And I would like to also welcome all of our visitors that we have with us this evening, including the viewing audience. And we will go right to item number 7, the reason for the special meeting request. Before that, we will sign in. Roll call, please. Thank you. And we will proceed. Now we will get to item number 7, and that is the resolution determination by the county board that emergency exists with respect to the repair and reconstruction of Marathon County Jail and authorization of transfer of funds from the capital reserve to pay for repairs and reconstruction. Resolution 39-19. And before we get to that, I would invite to the podium the administrator to give us the information that we have been dealing with. And I would explain to the board that I have been working with administration very closely on this issue. I have been working with the Sheriff's Department, the Chief Deputy, Maintenance, and we have been informed all the way, and I have been informed as this whole thing has developed, and I have tried to keep the board informed as what factual information I had at the time when, and that's why we're calling this meeting. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbs, and good evening, everyone. I just want to clarify a couple of things, and that is we are not working under our normal procedures. If we were in a normal situation, we would have waited till November. We would have had clear reports, clear data. It would have went through a committee. You'd have had time to study it. But we are actually operating in real time because there is a real emergency. And as a result, what a general would call a fog of war has existed. You know, we have many people doing different things. We have new discoveries. We have better understanding of what someone said, better visual observation. A lot of things have changed along the way. So it isn't that the early information was wrong, but it wasn't intentionally wrong. It's just that we have now learned more and we're ready to move on. You have the resolution in front of you in your packet, and I just want to point out, or first of all, describe what I think the question is we're asking here. We're asking a what question, not a how question. If we get into how, I have the engineers here, if we absolutely have to get into how we're going to repair this, you're going to hear a lot of stuff, and you're not going to know any more than when you came from. So what we really need to decide is, number one, do you agree that the threshold for emergency exists? Yes or no? I can't imagine anybody's going to say no. But let me point out something to you down 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs down on the resolution, in the third line. And you see an engineering consultant regarding the risk of collapse of a portion of the jail. Okay, I'm here to tell you that that risk is being managed, but this didn't just fall off a tree into the resolution. That risk does exist. And that is why we're invoking the emergency authority of the administrator to take it to the point to where it is shore, the shoring is done, and it is prepared for a permanent solution. If we follow the code, or excuse me, the law on this, and you don't pass the resolution, I will complete the shoring and everything will sit idle for 5 months. And we will do the permanent solution with maybe a whole new team and a whole new perspective and a whole new snow load on the top of that building at that time. I will walk you through I just want to go back to the memorandum that I sent you. If you don't have it, I sent it to you email, but I'll go over each item. I don't have a firm amount. Yesterday at this time, I was feeling like it was going to be $500,000 because I misunderstood what someone told me. That's the shoring part. We now know that the short-term repair will be somewhere between $444,000 and $584,000. That will just get you to the point where you are prepared for the long-term solution. The long-term solution was being discussed by the engineers even at 5 o'clock tonight. They haven't got a permanent plan yet. They have some ideas. They're sharing ideas. They're working this through. But so the next number I'm going to give you is our staff's best guess of what this might cost with the temporary solution and the permanent, somewhere between $1.25 million and $2 million. Okay, and in my opinion, this is a serious enough situation where I think you should authorize the resolution, invoke the emergency powers authorized under the statutes, authorize $2 million, and let's go get this thing done and have it done before winter starts. The delay, I already talked to you about the delay. I said in the newspaper article 6 to 8 weeks. That's what I thought at the time. I was wrong. I now have if you want to go through how it could be 5 months, I have a Gantt chart. And we can go through that with you and explain how it got to be 5 months. But it's all the procurement, it's all the mobilizing a crew, it's a lot of stuff that we normally do. The reason that we normally do things is that market power and competition ends up in better costs generally. But I'm going to put forward to you that not in this case. And we're going to do everything we can to to manage the cost of this. But we think we should go forward with the team that we have in place, because if we take 5 months off, the cost of housing alone in out-of-county jails will be $325,000. I don't have a figure for how much patrol time will be lost shuffling inmates from here to there. And also think about it, half of our jailers are going to have little to do during that time period. So while we'll be paying their jailers, we'll have to find work for our jailers, or we could lay them off and then have to hire jailers again because they found work elsewhere, because in this work environment, it's not hard to find work elsewhere. So it is my opinion that we will actually cost more to delay and use the normal procedures under the law. How did we come upon this? I probably should have started with this, but this is not an easy thing to know where the beginning is. The problems with the jail addition, which was completed in, I believe, 1999, or 98 or 99, one of the two. 98. Were known shortly after it was received. No one told me about it here in the HR department, but the people who were involved in the construction and the county administrator knew about cracks emerging, and they did some repairs. And the goal was then to just continue to monitor. And then I became administrator, and 5 years ago, the cracks started to really get significant. And we called in a structural engineer, which I believe was from Chicago. And he did a lot of data, and he said, you're going to need to continue to monitor data, but I don't see an emergency right now. And we put on monitors on those cracks, and the cracks were pretty stable for a while, but still increasing. In fact, one of the things we were continually doing was adjusting the big steel doors in a jail, because if you think about it, if a floor sinks just a little bit, it doesn't take long to pinch a big steel door. And that's one of the things I'm afraid of here now is if we readjust and the door and the floor is flattened out some, if I got somebody behind a big steel door, how am I going to get them out? So, you know, that's why we've evacuated about half of the jail. The whole half of it is really involves the new project. And we as a management team were getting a little annoyed with the structural engineer we had from Chicago because he kept saying, well, just spend another $70,000 and then keep monitoring and then spend another. So we decided, okay, we have a team of engineers over working on the library project right now. What if we just invite them to come over and take a look at this project? Well, they came over and took a look at it, and they said, the time for waiting is over. We need to do something. We need to do it fast. That there is this potential for collapse, where there is danger, but there is not a crisis. So I'm walking this tightrope here when I talk to you. There is an emergency. We have evacuated part of it. We've taken reasonable precautionary actions, but we do need to do something now. The barrier to, we're going to take this to the point to where it's shored up. The really only question that I think that's important is that you have to answer is, are we going to have a resolution that is necessary to free us from the normal procurement process? And I need somebody to put a dollar amount in the bottom of the resolution by amendment that says costs incurred. Now, the minimum you need to put in there is enough for the shoring. Okay, so you have to put that in there. If you put something less than $2 million, you open up the door to more potential special meetings. Okay, so I don't know why you would do that. I think that's undesirable, and we'll schedule them on every Packer game there is. Don't kid yourself. That's a joke. Don't take it too seriously, Jeff. It seems to me, and I don't know if you want more detail than this. I'm trying to give you an overview so we can get you in here and out here, because I think actually it's an easy question, is that we should put the maximum amount down there. We'll continue to give you reports. We'll continue to give you updates. We are absolutely committed to trying to get the best value for the public, but the best value, I think, is accomplished by approving the waiver.
Okay, questions? Supervisor, let's use the request to speak. Supervisor Zareni.
Brad, you said the engineers are still working on a solution on this, and you used the term shoring up. So how much have we spent to this point in the shoring up? Is that the $500,000 we've already spent in the shoring up process?
No, but it's close to that. It's probably over $300,000.
Okay, could we find ourselves at a position where the engineers are at a point where they say, this is too broken to fix?
No.
We're not going to get at that point where you make an investment and they say we can't do it?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, thanks.
None of the information I have to this point has ever suggested that.
Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a number of questions. May I direct them directly to?
Go ahead.
Thank you, to the administrator. When did this first come to light? When you first called in the outside engineer?
Okay, I have that somewhere. It was the 15th of July, I believe.
Okay.
The 19th.
19th.
19th
Okay.
of July.
Okay. And when did they first say that, oh, this is a serious problem? That there's a potential of failure here and
The
collapse?
19th of July. That's when I first knew it.
Okay. I guess my issue here is we're being asked to authorize up to $2 million, and it happened almost a month ago. Why haven't we gotten some kind of specific information? I mean, you're asking us to take one heck of a leap of faith here on, yeah, it's terrible, and I understand. It may be. But I think we could have been better informed as a board earlier. And I just wish that we had kind of been brought on board a little bit sooner.
Here's what I think. I think that might be true, and I think after we're done with this, a group of us could sit down and figure out what we could have done better. But right now we're in the middle of
No,
it.
no, I
You
under-
understand what I'm saying?
No, I understand
I'm not saying
that
that we
completely.
maybe couldn't have done, I don't know about the idea of sending out an email to board members the day I first heard something, and I'm still talking to the team, but I'm not opposed to that. I'm interested, I think a good idea would be, building on your idea, putting a group of people together and kind of do an after-action review.
What I was actually suggesting is that once the engineer came back and said, we have an issue, we should have been informed at that point, not when they were initially brought in. But once they identified the problem, it
Okay.
would have been helpful for all of us to have information of the scope of the problem.
Okay.
Because to come in and, you know, at noon, we get your estimate, until then, we had no clue. No
One
idea.
of the things, though, I will remind this board, and I have been reminded of this by the board itself, and all of the education that we've had, that this is a policy board. And sometimes we get into the details, and to be quite honest, we didn't have all of the information and still don't have all of the information. In fact, some of these numbers that are being provided to you today were numbers that were gathered today. And so we couldn't have provided some of the information on the 19th because we didn't know what we didn't know.
Then the follow-up question would be, would it be possible to authorize the money for the shore up and then, under emergency conditions, do a quickie bid process and we would authorize the monies from there? I'm just asking the question.
I will have Corp Counsel respond to that question. It's a
And if
legal
we're
question.
authorizing it once, I don't see why we couldn't authorize it. a
I
second.
will let Corp Counsel answer the question. You asked the question, let the Corp Counsel answer the question, please.
Well, I think that there's, I think that we're either going to follow procurement or we're not going to follow procurement. And one of the things that Brad asked me to do when I attended meetings was to look into what the nature of the issue was and what our options were legally. And it does permit us to determine that there's an emergency. I don't know that a quickie procurement is really a procurement. What we're trying to do is maximize the value that we're getting from the contractors that we're working for. I just wanted to mention one other thing, and this may be a question that comes up. I did, when I was asked for my legal opinion about what was going on, I did look at the law and I looked at our own procurement code. And the law talks about public works projects, which include remodeling, construction, reconstruction, repair of a public facility. That statute governs public works projects. We are not subject to statute when we're talking about procurement of services or equipment. And I had said, perhaps we can split a legal hair here and say, well, you know, this engineer is really a service. It's not really the construction. It's not really the repair. And maybe the shoring is just equipment that is, you know, that we're going to use for reinforcement, and it's not really part of the repair and reconstruction process. And possibly, and you'll note in the resolution that we talk about perhaps getting financial advice on how to handle this. That would be a service too, and we wouldn't actually have to go to the board. Our procurement code allows department heads actually to make that kind of determination. And in consultation with board leadership and Brad, it was decided, you know, no, Scott, we don't want you to split those legal hairs. We want to go to the board. We want to tell them what we want to do. And that's why the resolution appears before you the way it does, including those other services. So thank you for giving me that
No, thank you very
opportunity.
much, but let me just state why I have this concern, because if we authorize up to $2 million, my concern is that a contractor is going to know they can charge up to $2 million. And I would bet dollars to donuts, the bill's going to come in somewhere north of 1.9, regardless of whatever is done. That's my concern, is trying to look out for the folks who pay the bills, who are the people who employ us. And that's my concern, is that without any type of looking ahead or any kind of, even quick bid, once we've established how much work has to be done, if you throw out a number of $2 million that will pay up to that, I mean, take a guess what the bill's going to be. That's my concern.
Valid
Okay?
concern, valid
All right.
concern, no
Thank you.
question.
Thank you.
And I would just say this, that we have been working on contracts with the individuals that we are working with, and we are trying to define what the hourly rates are going to be for the services and for the construction work that's being done, as well as the material costs, so that we can monitor what's being used, whose time is being used, and do that. Valid concern.
Supervisor Gumbs.
Mr. Chairman, could you I understood you just said we're a policy board, but could you please enlighten us a little bit? What has failed? So when I run across people I represent, I can halfway tell them what we're spending this money on is the foundation. Is a little bit, please? Or is there an engineer here that could do it better?
You want me to call, let's see which one we should go.
We'll have the engineer try to explain as briefly as they can the issues that have been identified. So
Mr. Leiferman would come forward. Michael Leiferman of Strategic Structural Design. He's the engineer that was working, why don't you come all the way up, Michael? That was working with the library that we asked to come over and take a look at it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Michael, he's hoping for the kind of explanation that you can tell a neighbor. Got it? Okay.
The structure is a cast-in-place concrete structure, and it's a flat slab structure rather than a beam structure. And those structures, there's a critical connection between the slab and the columns, and that connection is deficient, in a nutshell. So there isn't the code required factor of safety in that connection, and that's what raised the alarm bells, because that connection failure is not a small problem. It's a big problem. Is that kind of?
so where the floor is meeting the
Floor
columns.
connection to the column
Correct.
is at issue, yes.
And compounding that is the floor sag and deflection.
Yeah, there's secondary issues, but the primary one that caused Brad to make the decision to shut down that structure was that connection.
How will you fix it?
Sure, yeah. We'll add reinforcing around the column to support the slab at the column connection. Thank you. Sure.
Supervisor Rosenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question probably more towards you or Mr. Carter. I think you kind of touched on this, but is our option, we're either doing this emergency resolution or we wait 5 months. There is nothing in between. There's no way to, that's it. Okay.
Yes.
So my other question then is the emergency rule only applicable to the facility? I know you mentioned kind of going back and forth with jailers and transporting prisoners to their courts. Like, could there be an emergency rule where our judges are amenable to teleconference, for instance, instead of in person? Like, are there other ways to kind of make this work?
Can I just have that minute?
Go ahead.
The court system has done a fantastic job of rising up to this. They are now doing video conferencing where they wouldn't have done it before, and they are approving people on home monitor who are eligible for that, but in the past were denied it. Everyone is trying to pitch in and do their part to minimize the costs, and I think we owe a debt of gratitude to the judges and particularly the chief judge and all the people that work in the criminal justice system for helping us through this difficult period.
I think
Go 5 months, that might be a bigger problem, but
the factual issue is that we put, and the chief deputy could speak to this, but there's 25 additional inmates that are out on electronic monitoring, and we have 55 additional prisoners that have been transported to additional and contracted to neighboring county jails when we vacated the areas that we moved people out to be able to address even just the shoring that was needed to be done to make the building safe. And so the next step is, do we want to do the permanent fix at the same time when the structure is open, when the ceiling tiles are open, when the temporary shoring is in there, and go ahead and do the fix at the same time, which makes, from a practical standpoint, don't incur the additional 5 months of sitting around doing nothing. And at this point, DOC says that part of the jail that is vacated is uninhabitable.
Okay, thank you. I'm just wanting to understand if this situation is sustainable. It seems like we've gotten innovative when it comes to addressing the issue. And from a policy side, they didn't even need us to get there with them. So It kind of gives me hope, but thanks.
Okay, Supervisor Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The engineer stated that the pilings and the floor were not connected. Is that?
I can't hear you. There you go.
Is the engineer stated that they weren't connected. They were not connected properly?
No, he's not saying that. He's saying that that's part of the potential failure points.
Okay, 20 years ago, we sat, not in this room, but we had a problem with that floor sagging then. Because Administrator McBain came to this board and says, the engineer says, if we just fill in this dip, everything is fine. I voted against whatever that amount of money was to get out of that lawsuit or whatever it is. But I don't think this is something that's happened in the last 10 or 15 years. I think it's been going on since the first year that building was built, which is water over the dam. I'm all for spending the money now.
It's been going on not since the building was built, but since the addition came on.
The addition, that's what I'm talking about, because that's when the floor was sagging and we had to pour cement in there so that the doors would match.
Yes, and it has been monitored. When the other structural engineer came in 2014, we started and maintenance. The maintenance department has done a great job of monitoring the movements in the floors and the walls, in the cracks. And during this winter with the heavy snow load, and up until this past winter, there's been minimal movement. But what has contributed to, or what we feel, or the assumption is that the additional snow load has contributed to additional movement that has been noted on those monitoring devices that are in the structure that we've noticed after and during this winter. Supervisor Robinson.
First of all, I want to commend all the parties that have been involved in this and trying to deal with with an emergency and trying to put the issue of safety first and appreciate the willingness to look at new alternatives. My concerns are similar to Supervisor Johnson's, but I want to revisit the issue of the timing of this. So we're asked to do the shoring on an emergency basis, and I don't know what that gives us relative to the permanent repairs. And is there an opportunity for us as a board to authorize a stepped approach, step one being the shoring, come back, we can still do it as an emergency at the August meeting when we have additional facts, options, and more precise cost, and move on to phase two of an emergency response. What are we getting with the shoring? Where are we going with the permanent? I understand there may be some economies of scale, but I think we're all searching for an answer as to what are we doing, what's the first step, and what's the second step. So can you help us?
Sort a little bit of that out. I have already authorized the shoring under my authority as the administrator, emergency powers as the administrator, so that's already in place and moving just because I had to move fast. If you want an explanation of what the shoring is, I could invite Mike back up and explain it because I would do it in such layman's terms, it probably wouldn't be more than what you know now. Do you want Michael?
Well, the question is I don't understand the difference between shoring, where we seem to have a good understanding of the cost.
The shoring is putting temporary bracing and putting temporary jacks and relieving some of the stress on those joints where the floor is meeting the column. And so underneath the column, and if you drive around the entrance, the north side of the building, you will see in place around each of those columns multiple temporary supports. And those supports has expanded the support around the column to alleviate one of the concerns is a punching shear. Now we're getting way into the weeds, but that's what it is. It does not allow us to reoccupy the jail. It only puts into the place and stabilizes the building at this point to prevent the catastrophic failure. That's what the temporary shoring has done. The next step would be a permanent fix, and the rationale that we have discussed is that while all of this is being opened up to do the temporary shoring, it has been, then is when the exploration, identification of a permanent fix can be identified, what issues are going to have to be worked around, what specific permanent fix would look like, whether we have additional beams, additional columns, additional permanent supports. That's what the other, and it makes, in my opinion, it makes the most sense to be doing that at the same time when we're doing the temporary shoring.
So again, from a phased approach, normally if we were a private sector board of directors, you would want to have a little bit better handle on what those costs might be. And you may deal with it incrementally. In 2 weeks, will we have a better idea of what those permanent costs are and what our options are relative to that? Let's say hypothetically that the permanent solution has ranges of options that have variable cost. Will we be in a, I'm sort of asking the question, can we deal with the shoring, the declaration of the emergency now, get us out into a separate procurement process, move ahead with the shoring tonight, come back in 2 weeks when we meet as a board again, revisit the issue on the permanent fix when we've got a better handle on our
And
costs.
that is doable. What has, again, tonight we did a walkthrough with the engineers, with maintenance, and looked at some additional issues. And so we may have, and I will not speak for the engineers, but we may have, I'm not saying that we will, but we may have a better understanding of what the estimated costs are. Again, we got these numbers this morning, and so, and we had a more exploration today. And so it's something that's fluid and in flux. But yes, we could potentially do the emergency resolution, a authorization of the temporary shoring, and then come back with more information on the August meeting and identify the permanent fix and the cost, potentially a better understanding of the permanent fix.
Mr. Chair, if I could just interject, the way I would suggest you do that, if you go to item D and it says the dollar amount, rather than putting the $2 million that I think you ought to do, you could put $584,000. Then we have plenty of money to do the shoring, and then we come back for the rest. Accomplish what you want to accomplish and still allow us to continue on in our work.
Supervisor
Everyone
Johnson.
agrees with me, but do you agree, Scott?
Right.
Okay.
I did my best to tee this up so that you can make that decision.
Thank you very much. What is the overall timeline on the shoring? How long is that going to take?
It was, as it was explained to me, 2 to 3 weeks.
Excellent.
from the start, and they began work on Monday, this Monday.
Excellent. That does kind of dovetail with our next meeting schedule as far as having more complete information as to cost and. Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Leahy.
Yes, thank you. I guess I sort of have a question about this term permanent. We've kind of mentioned that some of these problems are coming from the addition that took place 20 years ago. Do we have any sort of an estimate of what the projected time that, this new construction, this new fix is going to last? I know that's kind of a crazy question in construction. But are we talking $2 million and we shouldn't have to look at this again for 20 years, 30 years? Do we have any kind of idea, I guess, to base that on? Thanks.
Mike, can you help me with that? Are we talking,
So-
what she's afraid of is it might
so
be a
the
2-year
question-
fix. They're permanent
They're
repairs.
permanent
does that mean
repairs
20
and
years?
should outlive the usefulness of the building.
Okay.
And we're 20 years into that life cycle, and that life cycle initially was 50 years for that addition. Supervisor Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Supervisor Leahy kind of stole part of my question, but I think I have maybe still another question. So I have actually toured the jail twice in the last year. One was part of the Citizens Academy that I did, and then a different time, handful of us went in actually with the purpose of looking at the structural issues, but also to talk about, we've been hearing a lot about there's all kinds of issues at the jail. We talked about, a lot of logistical problems they have, staffing issues, things that need to be modernized, overcrowding, that kind of thing. So I guess kind of building off what Supervisor Leahy said, does this $2 million permanent fix, does that also address all those other kind of issues that we have, or are we going to see again, 5 years from now or however long that we still have staffing problems and still have overcrowding and things like that?
No, it doesn't address any of those issues. It just provides for the structural integrity of the facility as it is.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Mask.
Thank you. So if the life of this building was supposed to be 50 years, does that mean the original work was inferior?
I have no idea. I have no opinion on that. I have no knowledge. You're talking about the 88 work?
Well, I remember hearing about it a long time ago with the addition. What's failing now, that is supposed to be a
That would
50.
be the 98 work.
Okay. That's supposed to be a 50-year building?
Yes.
So this sounds like pretty premature wear and tear.
One of the things that I've already put in place, and it's referenced somewhere in the resolution, is keeping track of what all our costs are. Our focus has been on eliminating the emergency. We are keeping track of our own time, all of our expenses, in case we do a determination, find out that we have a funding partner.
Supervisor Seibert.
Thank you.
It was answered.
Answered? All right. Any other questions? I guess I would entertain a motion on the resolution that is before you, Resolution 39-19. Supervisor Christensen with a motion to approve, and Supervisor Nutting with a second. Supervisor Johnson with a question.
Not a question. We need to put a dollar amount under D.
So I would accept a motion to amend to include. Yep.
Motion to amend to authorize up to $584,966, and that will
Be placed
care
in
of that.
item D where
Right.
it is to be determined by the board. Is
Correct.
there a
Thank you.
second? Second by Supervisor Robinson. Any discussion on the amendment? The amendment will now insert in, now therefore be it ordained and resolved, the Board of Supervisors of Marathon County, the County of Marathon, that item D, cost incurred by the county pursuant to this resolution shall be funded by a transfer from the general fund working capital reserve into a separate sub-funds for operations and capital in the amount not to exceed $584,966. Any discussion. Supervisor Christensen.
Yes, Mr. Chair, or maybe Brad can answer this. Is this going to hamstring us? I mean, we get to $500,000 or $600,000, and now we got to stop the work because we're not authorized to go any farther.
It could.
No, I don't think so.
The maintenance director is saying, yes, it could. It absolutely could. Michael, I would invite the maintenance department director, Michael Lauder, up here to address the board.
Thank you. The one thing we're going to run into if we don't continue to go forward, and this might be a how it's worded type of thing, is you're not authorizing our engineer to continue to try to figure out a solution. We're authorizing them right now, the way I understand it, to do the temporary shoring. So I don't know how we come back to you in 2 weeks and tell you what the solution costs if we can't continue to assess the problem and come up with a solution that we can put a number to. So I just wanted to make that point is we're really only, I believe, authorizing a temporary shoring project. And right now, that doesn't give us the authority to say to the engineer, move ahead and figure out a solution. And the whole plan that we were trying to do is, as they were shoring, have our engineer continue to address the solution or the issues as we open up the ceilings and look at things and put together a solution. But if we can only move forward with the shoring, you're going to handcuff them, and they're not going to be able to continue to do that. And that was the only point that I was worried about, because we were saying, yes, we could come back with a number. I don't believe we can do that in 2 weeks if we can't continue to move forward. We're only doing shoring then.
Okay, all right. Supervisor Schaefer.
Does the amendment require 2/3 of the full board?
The amendment would not, but the full resolution would require 2/3 of the board, which is 26 members.
So the amendment is a simple majority?
The amendment is a simple majority.
Point of order, I don't think it's an amendment because there was no number there. Is it?
Yes, it is.
It is? It is still? Okay, okay.
Intentionally left blank.
Okay, Supervisor Robinson.
In light of Michael's concerns, I would move to amend the amendment to include costs associated with developing engineering studies for a permanent solution.
Second.
And the intent would be to let us fill that, to prepare those costs. So that would be some sufficient appropriation.
Okay, is there a second to that amendment? Supervisor Johnson with the second. Now, is there any questions on the amendment to the amendment? So the amendment is to insert a sum sufficient to include engineering costs to determine a permanent fix so that the board will have a better number when this board meets and has a voting meeting on the 27th of this month. Is that clear? Okay. We will, any further discussion? We have Supervisor Nutting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My thought was that this was a time is of the essence type of a decision, and that I would urge the board to allow the exact funding that we were told earlier so that this job could be completed at this time. Because we are inconveniencing not only our staff there, but the costs of the time of these of our inmates having to be elsewhere and the building being unoccupied in that section. I think we need to move forward with the costs necessary to remedy this right now at this time. That's my thought. Thank you.
Okay, Supervisor Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My understanding is there will be no delay because it's going to take a couple of weeks to shore it up anyway. and it'll be back before this board. We're just going to get a more accurate number, is my understanding. We're authorizing the engineer with the amendment to the amendment to more accurately define the permanent solution and the cost of that permanent fix of the structure. And so I don't think we're putting anybody at risk, or we're not taking any longer. We're not inconveniencing anyone. We're just being a little bit more fiscally prudent, in my opinion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Supervisor Robinson introduced a resolution that I was going to also, so no further.
Supervisor Wagner.
Do we have to increase that dollar amount then for the engineering costs instead of the 584 and change? If that was just for the shoring up, do we have to throw a couple $100,000 in there for that, or how does that work?
So I'll ask the finance director, are we going to be able to work with the way the motion has been made by Supervisor Robinson, the amendment to the amendment to say a sum sufficient to include the engineering needed to come up with a permanent fix and potential identification of the total cost? Yes? Yes, yes, no, maybe? That's the words the supervisor used, some sufficient.
Would that be able to include the operating and capital costs? Because you also have to cover the cost of the inmates.
Out of county.
The boarding of prisoners, electronic monitoring, and miscellaneous costs of the sheriff's department. That could be some sufficient. And if you don't want that, we work really closely with Michael's team, and we can definitely get that number in there.
You started it. Supervisor Rosenberg.
I just wanted to give my viewpoint on this amended amendment, which I do plan on supporting. I think that $500,000 is a lot to ask for right now, but $2 million, I've already received complaints from people who don't want to see $2 million spent right now on this jail without policy that addresses other justice issues. So I'm just kind of throwing that out there. That's where I am right now.
Supervisor Robinson.
Chrissy, you may have a valid point, but the original resolution didn't address those costs. I think those are costs that will have to come back at a later date relative to transfers and other things. So I think what we're focusing on tonight is the issue of the repairs, associated cost with that. I think you raised valid points of what do we have relative to increased costs, relative to monitoring and others. This resolution does not address those, so let's not confuse it, and let's also remember that at some point in the future, we're going to have to deal with potential transfers of funds to deal with those issues.
Any further? Supervisor Wagner.
Again, I don't think my question was answered. If we were going with $584,000 for the shoring up, but it wasn't going to allow the engineers to continue to work on what a solution is, those engineers probably need to be paid for additional work. So do we need to throw a certain percentage of increase into that? And could they tell us what they thought the engineers might need to do that? Or else we're right back to where we're just shoring it up, unless I'm not being clear in my mind.
Okay, Supervisor Robinson.
The purpose of using the term "some sufficient," it's more a word of art used in the legislature, is to make sure that they have the resources available adequately to pay for those services. So you have the shoring cost, set amount, and an authorization to incur costs for engineering services above that amount. That is the intent of the amendment to the amendment, to allow them to contract with the engineer to do that. It was.
So is there any further discussion? So the amendment to the amendment includes a sum sufficient to pay and provide enough funding to pay for whatever cost the engineering design is going to be to come up with a permanent fix for the identified problems in the jail from a structural standpoint. Is that clear on everybody? Supervisor Boots has asked to abstain, and that has been granted because of his employment. And so is there any further discussion on the amendment to the amendment? All right, we will proceed to vote. Supervisor Lowe, Kelbach, and confirm, thank you. Supervisor Lowe, confirm, thank you, and we'll proceed. And the motion is carried 26-2, 1 abstention. Okay, now back to the motion as amended on the original amendment to include the $584,966 for the temporary shoring. Is there any discussion on that amendment? That also now includes the sum sufficient for engineering to do the engineering work. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Mask, please. Thank you. And we will proceed. The motion, the motion fails. It is required 2/3 majority.
No,
Oh,
this is.
Excuse me, this is just a majority vote, excuse me. So the amendment, it passes. And now we're back to the original resolution. This resolution now would require 2/3 majority, which is 26 votes. This is Corp Council's ruling. Don't look at me, John. Corp Council's ruling, 26 members of this board need to vote to a 2/3 majority to do a budget transfer from reserves. And so we are there at that point. Again, any discussion on the resolution as it sits today? As it sits today, it reads basically all the same, except for where the to be determined by the board will insert $584,966 in plus a sum sufficient to do the engineering work to design a permanent fix for the jail. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Understand, a no vote, we will not be able to proceed. We will continue to do the shoring, the temporary shoring, but you will have put everything else on hold. And you will not have a facility to put inmates in moving forward. And you will not have a design to do a permanent fix. And as the DOC has already announced, that facility is uninhabitable. Supervisor Zereni.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. If that fails, I mean, the motion can come back at the original 2 million, correct?
I will ask Corp Counsel.
I don't believe so, because the majority has approved the amendment that adds the $584,966 plus the If that amendment had failed, then we would have been open to further amendment with a different amount, with a higher amount of money. But the majority has spoken with respect to the amount of money. So if this vote fails, then we'll be in a difficult position.
Supervisor Schaefer.
You know, as someone I voted against that jail for many, many different reasons, quite a few times over the last 25 years. But we have to do something. So if anyone plans on voting no on this, I hope they will come back with something that will replace all the problems we're going to have over the next couple of months.
Supervisor Johnson.
It was answered.
Supervisor Zhang.
I just have a question for corporate counsel. If it did fail, are we able to ask for reconsideration of the resolution?
Yes, but it would have to come from somebody that voted no. Somebody who did not vote with the prevailing side. I think that there might, well, that's the answer to that.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? I just want to be clear with everybody on this board that is voting today. If you vote no, you are voting to basically cease operation in that part and cease the shoring and cease the engineering work and cease being able to utilize that portion of the jail maybe for this term of this board. Is that clear? All right, we will proceed to vote. Supervisor Beastrom, could you confirm, please? Thank you, and we will proceed. And the motion is carried, 28-0, 1 abstention, 9 absent. And that is the only item on the agenda. Item number 8, announcements and/or requests. Supervisor Schaefer. Oh. Supervisor Beastrom.
Athens Fair is next week, August 15 to 18. If you've been there before, you'll probably be there again. If you haven't ever been there, this will be the year for you to start. Good time is had by all. See you at the fair. Thank you.
Any other discussion? All right, excuse me, any other announcements and/or requests? All right, I will take the infamous motion. Supervisor Zhang with the motion, Supervisor Schaefer with the second to adjourn. Any discussion? All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.